Our memory is a pretty wild thing. One minute, it feels like a supercomputer, pulling up facts with perfect clarity. The next, it feels like, well, a work of fiction. So what's really going on in there? Are our minds just replaying the past like a recording, or are they actively telling us a story about what happened?
I mean, think about it. You can probably belt out the lyrics to some song from way back when, a memory you haven't touched in a decade. But try to remember what you ate just last week. It's gone, right? Well, that's not a bug in the system. It's actually a huge clue about how our memory is built from the ground up.
So psychologists basically have these two camps, two completely different ways of looking at memory. The first view sees it as a computer, a superlogical system that records, stores, and pulls up data perfectly every time. The other view, it sees our memory as a storyteller, a creative, active author that rebuilds the past each time we remember it, maybe tweaking a few details along the way.
All right, so let's jump into that first idea, memory as a machine. This is often called the multi-store model, and it pictures our memory as this really clear, predictable system, kind of like a piece of hardware.
So, according to this computer model, information only flows in one direction, through three key stages. First up, you've got input. That's all the sights, sounds, and feelings coming in from the world. Then there's encoding, where your brain has to convert all that stuff into a format it can actually store, like saving a file. And finally, you have output, which is just you pulling that information back up when you need it.
Now, the first really critical piece of this hardware is short-term memory. The best way to think about this is like your computer's RAM. It holds exactly what you're working on right now, but its space is super limited. If you don't make a point to save that information, it's just gone.
And when you put them side by side, the differences are just staggering. Our short-term memory can only hold about 7 things for, get this, less than 30 seconds. Meanwhile, our long-term memory has, for all intents and purposes, an unlimited capacity and can last a lifetime. So how do we know for sure that our short-term storage is that fragile?
Well, back in 1959, two psychologists, a husband and wife team named Peterson and Peterson, came up with this brilliantly simple experiment to basically measure the exact lifespan of a memory in that short-term buffer.
Okay, so here's how they did it. People were shown a totally meaningless set of 3 consonants, like BVM. Then, and this is the really clever part, to stop them from repeating it over and over in their heads, what we call rehearsal, they were immediately told to do something distracting, like count backwards by 3s from a random number. Then, after a few seconds, they were asked, okay, what were the letters? And the results were just crystal clear. After only 3 seconds, people remembered the letters about 80% of the time. Pretty good. But if you waited just 18 seconds, recall absolutely plummeted to less than 10%. It proved that without rehearsal, the information in our short-term memory just evaporates. But what if that's not the whole picture? Let's switch gears and look at that second model, which gives us a completely different vision. What if memory isn't this fragile recording at all, but a robust, creative process of reconstruction?
Way back in 1932, a psychologist named Frederick Bartlett proposed this really radical idea. He said memory isn't replayed, it's rebuilt from scratch every single time you access it. He believed we use our existing mental frameworks, he called them our schemas, to fill in the gaps and just make sense of the past. And this is where it gets kind of weird. If we're constantly rebuilding the past, we're also reshaping the story of who we are.
So to test this idea, Bartlett did something brilliant. He took a group of British folks and had them read this Native American folktale that was completely alien to their culture. It was full of bizarre stuff, ghosts coming out of people's mouths, spirit battles, things that just didn't compute. Then he'd ask them to recall the story over and over again.
And what he found was absolutely fascinating. People's memories didn't just fade. They actively changed the story to fit their own world. For example, the strange, literal phrase, "something black came out of his mouth," got rationalized and rewritten into something much more familiar, like a man's dying breath. And it wasn't just the weird, supernatural stuff. It happened with simple details, too. The word canoe, which wasn't a very common thing in 1930s Britain, almost always got swapped out for the much more familiar word boat. The memory wasn't just getting fuzzy. It was being actively edited.
So, Bartlett showed that our minds are basically editors. We leave out the details that don't make sense to us. We change things to be more familiar, like that canoe becoming a boat. We even add our own explanations to make the weird parts of the story make sense. We're basically forcing the past to fit into our present. So we've got these two very different models. One is a precise machine, the other is a creative storyteller. And this isn't just a simple disagreement. These ideas actually represent two fundamentally different ways of approaching science itself.
The computer model, that's what we call reductionist. It tries to understand a big, complex thing like memory by breaking it down into its tiniest parts, short-term store, long-term store, and so on. Bartlett's storyteller theory, on the other hand, is holistic. It says, no, you can only understand memory by looking at the whole person, their culture, their experiences, their beliefs.
And look, this isn't just some abstract academic debate. It has massive implications for understanding what happens when memory, the very thing that makes us who we are, goes wrong, like in cases of amnesia.
Take anterograde amnesia. It's a chilling, real-world example of that computer model in action. A person's short-term memory, their RAM, works perfectly fine, but the mechanism to save new experiences to the long-term hard drive is broken. They are quite literally stuck in the present moment, unable to create new stories.
And then there's retrograde amnesia, which is when you lose memories from your past. This is like having the files that make up your life story just get corrupted or deleted. It can wipe out a few years, or, in the most devastating cases, a person can completely forget who they are.
There was a famous patient, Henry Molaison, whose tragic but incredibly important case taught us so much. After brain surgery, he was left with severe amnesia. He could remember his childhood, but he couldn't form a single new long-term memory. His case gave us powerful, real-world proof that memory isn't just one thing, but a whole collection of different fragile systems working together in the brain.
So we're left with this incredible puzzle. We have solid evidence for the machine-like parts of our memory, but also for its creative, storytelling nature. And that brings us to one last, pretty deep thought. If your memory is constantly reconstructing your past to make sense of your present, then the story of your life is basically a living document, and the person you are today is both its author and its main character.